Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours with SKC. My name is Sarah Crum. I'm the managing partner of SKC & Co. CPAs. This is our last office hour of 2020. Many of us are happy to see 2020 roll into 2021, which will bring a whole new schedule of office hours. So we're excited about that. But for today, we are here to talk about technology, which is an extremely important topic. We've got a great panel set up for you. Just a couple housekeeping items to start off. We are recording this session because we like to put it up on the website for anybody who couldn't join us this morning. We also have all of our previous office hour sessions up and available on our website too. So if you weren't able to join us on previous sessions, please do check those out as well. We encourage active participation throughout all of the office hours, which is why this is live and not pre-recorded. So please pose all of your questions through the chat so that we can get them answered and have this be a meaningful conversation for you as well. Also, throughout this program, we're going to be using the chat to provide you with some additional information to help reach out to our panelists afterwards. So open up that panel if you haven't already and kind of keep your eye on it throughout the presentation. Also, we're going to be prompting you with some surveys throughout the hour just to keep you engaged and kind of get a pulse of where everybody is in the audience and on certain topics related to technology. So with that, I will have each of our panelists introduce themselves, starting with Kathy Koloff.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see some friendly faces. I am Kathy Koloff from IT Radix, and we are the outsourced IT department for small to medium businesses. We love to work with our clients with a high-touch, client-centric approach.
Great. Andrew D'Onofrio.
Morning. Thanks for being here. Thank you for having me this morning. In a former life, I was in law enforcement, and I ran a computer crimes unit for the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office for more than half my career. When I left that career in 2011, I started a cybersecurity firm, and now primarily I do business and operations management consulting and professional development coaching.
Great, thank you. And I was remiss in not introducing Karen Donaway, SKC's marketing director, who kind of manages the chat with me. So good morning, Karen.
Morning. Good morning, everyone. And thanks so much for joining us today.
And we also have Brittany, who is our marketing assistant here at SKC, and she manages all things survey related and making sure we all work well through this hour. So thanks, Brittany, for joining us too.
Problem. Good morning, everyone.
So this morning's session is broken out into three categories, if you will, or three topics around technology. The first is technology and security related primarily to working from home, which is where many of us have found ourselves in 2020. Then we move into purchases for 2020 that are important to have, as well as what we really should be budgeting for on a technology front in 2021. And then finally, we'll move into some new technology trends that business owners need to keep an eye out for. So let's dive in and see what we can learn today. So from things such as surge protectors to firewalls to routers, there's nothing too big or too small that we can't have in our home office to help support our technology. And when so many of us went remote in 2020, we didn't even begin to realize what we could possibly need, let alone supply all of our team members with what we could potentially need. So let's just throw up a quick survey to make sure everybody's up and running. This is basically how much time did you spend creating your home office in 2020? So you'll see some of the options are you may have already had a home office, 30 minutes, 1 to 2 hours, or those of you who spent the entire remodeling of your house in order to successfully work from home, which some of us had to have done. Just give it a couple more seconds before Brittany can share the results with everybody. All right, Britt, why don't we see where we are? All right, so good. A little bit more than half of you already had a home office, which is great. And I think, for SKC team members, it was pretty much like that as well. So good. All right, excellent. So let's talk about security must-haves for the home office. And Drew, I'll start with you. Cybersecurity overall kind of terrifies me, let alone what happens when our team leaves from underneath our roof in the office where we have the most control from a business owner's perspective. So that exposure of our data and our online softwares is terrifying. And if you could share with us what business owners can do to kind of protect our data, protect our team members in a safe and secure way while we're working from home.
Sure. You still have the usual suspects. And what I mean by that is, you still want the standards, which is the antivirus software, local firewall protection. But in this shift, we spend a lot of time hardening the exterior, if you will. And what I mean by that is we're all located in a building, even if we're VPNing in. But now we're sort of in this mixed use environment. So we have to look at it a little bit differently, right? We have to look at, hardening each individual system a lot better than we did in the past. So you want to make sure that everything's up to date, your local patching, all of that stuff is up to date. But what really gets missed in this environment now that we were on top of before is the education component. And the reason that is, I think, is because everybody's sort of busy and they don't understand or appreciate the need for it. And still in my experience, those old school, what I call those old school sort of sexy hacks, where you're really pounding at the keyboard, trying to exploit a system, exploit a firewall. That still occurs, but it doesn't occur nearly to the degree now where we're duping people into clicking on a link, downloading a file. So, it's really exploiting the end user. And it's sort of the functional equivalent of saying, well, let's really secure our house, right? And put great locks on it, great windows, but then somebody knocks on the door and you open it. And that's really what you're doing. And you just beat all your security, right? So that's really what you're doing when you click on a link in an email, open an email attachment, potentially that's malicious. So I think that what business owners really need to focus on and concentrate on, or at least get back to, is the education component, because our end user is really the worst enemy when it comes to security vulnerabilities.
That's a great point. And I've seen too, even in my emails coming in, there's been a lot of, I'll call them mass emails from sign now, things that look like sign now, or things that look like a voicemail that's come in, and maybe they've gone to me and then they've gone to a couple other team members through SKC. And I think when we all sort of switched to that remote environment, a lot of people falsely assumed that, oh, this must be what we're doing now, right? That everything's coming through sign now, this must be okay, or everything's coming through, this new look and whatever it is, because we're virtual, we're forwarding voicemails rather. And I think that's a great point, that really we have to just take a minute and stop rapid fire clicking when we go through our emails, and like you said, opening the door for this potential exposure. I think that's a great point. So Karen, yes, you're waving. Go ahead.
I have a question related to this. So is it true then that if you're working from home and you're using the network, or you're signing into the network of your company, do you have the protection of that company's firewall, or are you really just, whatever is in your dwelling? Or
for the most part, you're beholden to what's in your home. There are some strategies, but most small, mid-sized businesses won't utilize like what they call split tunneling, which is, hey, if I'm connected to the office network, I can't do anything within my local environment. That's more of a sophisticated security paradigm. But for the most part, you're vulnerable to that. And, the other thing that we have is like, and Kathy would know this obviously from the IT standpoint, is we will force end users to do things in a local environment, right? We'll force to make sure that their machine shuts off and reboots so that patches can get applied and software can update. But in a home environment, how many times do we say, oh, we'll do it later, and then ultimately patches don't get applied, software updates don't come in. So you're kind of, there are ways to do it where you're more tied to the office, but I would submit that most small to mid-sized companies are probably flying with what's the local security in the home.
So Kathy, let's talk a little bit about speed of internet and reliability of internet, because I know multi-family bodies are at home. We've got kids doing virtual schooling, and if they're not, they're gaming still during office hours. Maybe you have, a 2-income household where both people are working from home on various Zoom calls. What can we do as, I'll call it the layperson, right, in our own homes to make sure that we have reliable and sufficient, or efficient maybe is the better term, internet?
Right. So I think the first piece of advice is, look to see what options are available from your local ISP, whether that's Verizon, Comcast, Cablevision, or all some of the major ones that are out there. In the beginning of COVID, we saw a lot of issues with this. The cable providers in particular were really not prepared for the load that was being put on their networks. They have, I believe, uplifted their infrastructure, but we still have folks that are working, for example, in Western and Northern New Jersey, that are on, slower, less reliable internet, and it is what it is in that regard. However, we've also seen that many of our clients, they had a Wi-Fi network that they set up in their house, so that they could, hook their devices to it and so forth. And the Wi-Fi equipment that they've had, while it was adequate, 2 or 3 years ago, not adequate today. We have helped clients replace their Wi-Fi routers and modems and upgrade them to newer and better speeds. So the combination of getting the best that you can afford from a Verizon or a Comcast, and also upgrading your Wi-Fi equipment. We've also seen a lot of people, I saw somebody said they remodeled their house where they've had to put in Wi-Fi repeaters or extenders so that they can reach further areas away from their central spot. That has been a real thing for us. And then on the flip side, Drew mentioned the word VPN. With a lot of companies moving to this remote model, what we found was their home network was set up with the exact same, call it phone numbers or IP addresses as the office. And we had to play some games to get that to work as well. So the home network matters. It does matter what they've got in terms of Wi-Fi equipment. And then, of course, the carrier. You can only get what you can get from Verizon, but get the best that you can afford. Yeah.
And that was a realization for me, Kathy. I understood the concept, obviously, from the office standpoint of buying a better plan or getting more power, if you will, through the lines. I didn't realize the value of sort of a step up in a modem, right? And that was my ignorance on the home front. But to your point, both things are equally important in this efficiency and effectiveness process. You talked about getting the best for what you can afford in the area that you're in. So what is, Kathy, the impact of 5G on all of this? I know I would say maybe a month or so ago, my phone did an update and all of a sudden 5G pops up on the upper right-hand corner. But, again, as the layperson when it comes to technology, I was like, hey, the number changed. But what is the availability of 5G as far as you can tell in the northern New Jersey area, and how is that going to impact the working from home?
Right. So 5G is still being rolled out by the various carriers. It is definitely available in the more urban areas of northern New Jersey. We actually like it for a solution. So one of the things that Drew kind of touched on, I didn't really mention a minute ago, is if you can, from a security standpoint, it's ideal if we could, for example, Sarah, isolate you and your computer network from what the rest of the folks in your home are doing. And if you outfit somebody with a 5G connection in their laptop or in their tablet, for example, they are automatically isolated from each other, so that now if your son, my 13-year-old son, is in there playing Fortnite, I am on a totally different network than my son. And we are isolated from a performance standpoint and from a security standpoint. So I think it's going to be a game changer for some organizations, but it is not widely, at this point, the urban areas in northern New Jersey, yes. We have a client just up 287 and he's working from home and he can't get it. He can't even get regular cell phone service. So 5G is just not there yet, but it is going to be a game changer, I think.
Do we have any idea of when that timeline will be, of when it is more readily available?
I would encourage you to look at your carriers. They have maps on their web pages. So for example, T-Mobile, I know, is doing a huge push for 5G right now. And you would want to look at their coverage maps and inquire from whichever carrier that you're currently with. And it might merit that you change. If you really want 5G, you might want to switch from Verizon to T-Mobile if T-Mobile's got the 5G coverage that you're looking for. So.
Great, thank you.
Question.
Karen, go ahead.
Yeah. So Kathy, is that compartmentalizing of the network, that happens seamlessly with 5G? There's nothing that a user needs to do for that?
There are some implications to that. So if they're on a 5G network, if they want to, for example, print to a networked printer that's in their house, they're on a separate network. So they will now no longer be able to print to a printer that's in their house if they're on the 5G. So your computer can absolutely automatically connect, but you have to think about the whole big picture of what you're trying to do from a productivity standpoint. You can also set up your Wi-Fi to do guest networks and things like that. if you don't have 5G. You could set up your Wi-Fi to have a guest network.
Great. Kathy, I'm going to stick with you on this one, and it's all about the cloud. So I know a lot of different businesses are in different technology positions. Maybe some rely more or less on technology. Some were already predominantly in the cloud prior to 2020. What have you seen in the first quarter, I guess, of 2020, when a lot of people had to go remote? Were many of your clients, and again, that's an isolated population, but for the most part, it mirrors a lot of those on this call. Were most of your clients already on the cloud?
I would say for us, it was about a 60-40 split. 60% were not heavily cloud, 40% were more cloud oriented. And I would say that's flip-flopped now. I'd say that, that now about 60% of them have moved more of their systems to the cloud, maybe not necessarily all. And 40% are still working in their, in their network that's in their environment. And often it has to do with the software that they use to run their business. For example, QuickBooks is an accounting package, and they have a cloud-based solution, and they have an on-premise, we call it on-premise solution. And we find that accountants prefer the on-premise solution to the cloud-based solution. And so a lot of organizations will stick with the on-prem for QuickBooks, but perhaps everything else is in the cloud. So we've found a lot of companies have moved to this hybrid model where some things are cloud and some things are still in-house. And it's usually driven by the software or the business application that they're using.
What advice would you have for those companies who may not already be on the cloud or may not be able to make that investment right now rolling into 2021? Are there things that they absolutely need to plan for on the cloud side, or are there sort of, I'll call them band-aids to carry them through in what will continue to be a remote working environment?
I think there's a lot of solutions available out there today that even if you can't move your application to the cloud, you could implement in your internal network. So, with firewalls and VPN technology, you can enable a lot, even if you can't afford to move to the cloud. And then other clients, depending on the quantity and again, the application that they're running, we are looking at, okay, how can we get this up to the cloud? Even if the vendor themselves don't necessarily support a cloud solution. So it is a case-by-case basis. I would say, you want to really look at what are your business priorities in terms of the software that you're using and what you're trying to get done. As an example, we have a client that does a lot of scanning. And, there's not a lot of things that will scan directly to the cloud. They may need to invest in a different type of scanning technology in order to do that. And so we are talking with our clients with things about that. Solutions about that.
Great, thank you. So I'll pose this next question to both Drew and Kathy, and it kind of loops back to the security and the protection of our data as business owners. What types of policies or procedures do we have to potentially rewrite on our IT policies that were in existence prior to 2020? And then also, what things do we need to add that we possibly didn't think of when there was such a remote presence with our working environment? I would love you to start, but you're muted. So as long as you unmute, then we're good.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So from my perspective, one of the things that you really want to be definitive about is who's using the equipment, right? That's in the house. So we want to make sure that in our policy, to Kathy's point a second ago, we certainly don't want our 13-year-old on the same computer that we're using for work or the same iPad. So we want to make sure that we have isolated, dedicated computer systems and technology, and that the policy matches that. And then there's other things too, because we're at home now. We want to make sure that password reuse policies are strong as well. We don't want to use the same password that we're using for our in the cloud email or in the cloud accounting systems that we're using for Netflix. Because if you have a breach at Netflix and they start trying passwords, which is why a lot of breaches happen, then you're going to have issues with that. So, for that perspective, you want to make sure that you have the strong sort of at-home policy in place. The other thing too, from my experience, is what type of data and what type of conversation now are we having, right? Sensitive conversations happened in person before. Now, where do they happen? Right? They happen virtually over Zoom, over Teams, over different software platforms. And so we want to make sure that we're using the software and the policy reflects such that we're using video conference software in a secure manner. I have a client in the healthcare space, and they're talking about, telehealth. And originally it was Zoom. And I had to do a bunch of research for them about HIPAA and Zoom. And then ultimately we got super paranoid. And what we ended up doing was Zoom connection by video and audio connection by phone. So you almost segment the conversation out. That's a super paranoid approach. But, there's three aspects when you look at security, and you can kind of see that theme unfold here. There's the confidentiality of data, the integrity of data, and then the availability. So, Kathy and I are both kind of touching on confidentiality and integrity, and she's really hitting on the availability. But we want to make sure that none of those areas compromise the other. So the policy now at home has to reflect that.
I also think if you're going to allow the employees to use their own computer or their own devices, you need a strong, we call it bring your own device policy. So for example, one of our clients they deal in, they're a not-for-profit, and they deal in a very sensitive, space in terms of services. And they did not have, most of their employees did not have laptops, but they needed to make these folks, give them availability to this data that, Drew was referring to. And it had, case history, social security numbers, things like that. But they were needed to allow the employees to use their personal computer. So now they're in this little dilemma of what are we going to do to make sure that this confidential data doesn't end up on this person's home computer? And so it's important that you really stop and think about your data and where you're letting it, live in your employees' world.
And I think we'll notice too, even the big technology providers, Drew, you mentioned Zoom, and I noticed that in the beginning of the pandemic, you didn't have to have a password or a secure hosting waiting room for Zoom. And then all of a sudden at one point we started setting up meetings, and it mandated that you either had a password or you had a waiting room. And of course I tried to figure out a workaround because it wasn't very convenient. But then I realized, it was a security protocol that they put in place to, mirror everything that we're talking about now, the security and the confidentiality, et cetera.
And to that point, Sarah, there was two occasions, and this is a true story, two occasions where I jumped into client meetings and there was a child on the Zoom call. So how it happened is beyond me, but there's looked like he's waiting for school, and we just had to remove him, but I don't know how he got in there, and that was pre-password days, whether the link was closed, whether he manipulated the link or whatever it might be, but he was in.
It's alarming.
Yes.
So any questions from the audience on anything related to working from home before we move into some purchases before the end of 2020 and what we should budget for in 2021? Okay, great. So I read a survey of area CEOs a week or so ago that said that 55% of them plan on continuing to offer the work from home opportunity at their organizations even after the pandemic is over. And so for us as tax advisors and strategists, we've been talking now with our clients at year end about how we can maximize purchases in order to get the best tax benefit right before we hit December 31st. So what should we be planning on buying on the tech side? And we have a survey we're going to throw up because I also read an interesting article from a company called Expensify about what the reimbursements were. Basically it's an online tool for approving expense account reimbursements. And so they had a whole summary of 2020, what the most interesting expenses were that went through their system and whether or not they got approved. And a lot of them obviously were work from home. So somebody put through a private flight charter because they didn't want to fly commercial in COVID. That one wasn't approved. But somebody put in half the cost of their Peloton bike because they wanted the mental health work-life balance, and that was approved. So it was a really interesting article about what was and what wasn't approved from a work from home environment. Somebody actually put through, I think, doggy daycare so that their dog wasn't jumping on them on Zoom calls, and that got approved. So it was just an interesting article to read. But with that said, Brittany, if you could throw up the next survey, which is, has your company offered stipends to employees to make purchases to set up their home offices? All right, Brittany, that was a quick one because there's only two options. So it's pretty much a split, a 50-50 split, which is interesting. You know, and I guess obviously it depends on the size of your company, how necessary certain pieces of equipment are. I know at SKC, some of our team members have 3 monitors and it looks like, you know, space stations on their desks. I only have 2 and that's enough for me to manage, but everybody obviously has different needs. So let's jump into hardware since we're talking printers, scanners, multiple monitors. Kathy, before we jumped on with everybody, you and I were talking about webcams. So what are some of the best items to have when working from home? And what are the must-haves that if we don't have, we really, really should have?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. We talked about this. I talked about this with my team, and the one that stood out that they all said was a sit-stand desk because they're sitting so much, which is not really technology, but something that they all really appreciate. And there's a slew of options out there. I mean, I have one that's portable that I bought for $35. You know, that flexes in all kinds of shapes. It's great for a laptop, but then there's the full on, you know, move your desk up and down type of solutions as well. So that was number one that they mentioned I thought was interesting. And the other one that I think a lot of businesses are kind of ignoring, but should address is some sort of a voice over IP phone solution, because so many people now are doing business on their cell phones. And, you know, they're, oh, it's okay, I just transferred it to their cell phone. But let's think about post-pandemic. And, you know, people are starting to go back to the office. Everyone's going to be calling their cell phones instead of calling your business office. So if you could set them up with some sort of a voice over IP phone solution where they can take inbound calls in their homes and it's still in your corporate phone system. And then when they make outbound calls, it's also coming out as your corporate phone system. I believe that is a big one that a lot of businesses are not addressing. They've been relying on the cell phones. In terms of others, so that is an investment though, because it is a phone system. Other things that we've seen, we mentioned webcams. You know, the ones that are in the laptops are not necessarily the most flattering, but there are certainly plenty of people that have desktops that don't have a webcam. So we're strongly encouraging webcams. The other one is that we're finding, in fact, Sarah was kind of complaining about it earlier, is the built-in mic in the audio in the laptops is not necessarily the best. I'm not actually using a laptop, but I often like to use this instead, which is a wireless headset that I can literally walk all the way out to the trash can and back with this, and it will certainly improve the sound quality and your ability to hear what's going on as well as what you're saying. And it will help to drown out the background noise that's going on around you. So headset, those are things I will say very hard to come by. A few months ago, it is now starting to become more available, but the webcams and the headsets, multiple monitors is another one. Many people had multiple monitors in the office, and now they're home and they're working on this little teeny laptop screen. They're not nearly as productive and as efficient as they were. And now we're starting to get requests of what should I do about scanning? I need to scan documents. I need to print documents. And so we're seeing a lot more multifunction, sort of small, portable, multifunction printer scanner devices going out there. So these are the types of and then certainly many, many businesses shifting from the desktop to the laptop profile. So those are the hardware investments that we're seeing most of our clients making these days.
Yeah, I know Karen and I were on a seminar the other day when they talked about the microphone, right? And prior to everybody joining this morning, I had to take my headset off because, to Kathy's point, it just stopped working. But Karen, I don't know if you want to comment on the other two things from I'll call it a vanity standpoint, right? The microphone, and then of course the Zoom lights, because there's no web camera that can be flattering, Kathy. Certainly not the ones on our laptops, but I don't know one that's flattering at all. So, Karen, I know we've talked, especially from a marketing standpoint, if you're doing a lot of videos or presentations to clients, you always want to look your best. And so we talked about at SKC lighting and microphones, Karen. So I don't know if you want to add any color to that.
Yeah, because oftentimes, the natural lighting in your room, okay, maybe 1 hour a day, it's perfect. And the other, 7 that you're sitting there, it's not perfect. So there are things that you can buy. The ring light is super popular. It's not expensive and it will illuminate you at the exact way that would be flattering over video. And also super important is that external microphone. I mean, if you want to make that in investment, they also too, not a big ticket item, but having that external microphone takes away the headphones, the clarity is so much better. And it just really helps just from a standpoint of, as they say, people will forgive the video quality not being perfect, but they are not going to forgive the audio quality not being perfect. You'll lose them. And whether that's a Zoom call, whether it's a marketing piece you're doing, a video, the audio, super, super important. So well worth investing in that external microphone.
And I know at SKC, we had a sort of an internal thing going on where everybody was buying screen backgrounds, right? Not the green screens that you can change virtually, but actual physical backgrounds that they would put behind them. And then, of course, it ended up rolling into that semi-remodeling where you then just create a real background that you like better for everyone to look at on Zoom all the time. So very important as far as presentation and showing up and things like that. And before we switch over to the software side of things, I think it's important to talk about IT, I'll call it a P&L line item because I'm an accountant and that's as basic and as mathematical as I could make it sound. But it's really so much more than that. It's an investment, right? And I know at SKC, again, we're heavy technology, so that requires the hardware and the software. Technology is one of our top 3 expenditures. Besides our team members, their health insurance and related benefits and insurance, IT is really up there, both on the support side, the software side, the hardware investments, and it really changes the efficiency and the effectiveness of your team, and also thereby what you can deliver to your clients or your customers when all of that is working well in the back end. So it's an important investment to make, which is why it's so timely to be discussing this right before year end. So Drew, let's talk about some software since Kathy covered the hardware side of things, and we talked about Zoom. We know there's WebEx out there, there's Microsoft Teams for virtual meetings. What sort of collaboration software is out there that we may not have heard of that can support virtual meetings that may provide a more real world experience?
So, let me start by saying or acknowledging a little bit of a bias. The minute I get an invite to anything other than Zoom, I cringe because I'm just not sure how it's going to work. Teams has its moments. I have very little problems with Zoom as a whole. Google Meets is an absolute nightmare. Every time I use it, with that, invariably, to Karen's point, I can't hear a darn thing in that meeting, and it's stutter stepping, and I actually have to turn on captions, so I'm like reading what they're saying. It's crazy. So I've had the most success with Zoom, and I think it just comes down to the security awareness of what Zoom can and can't do, and what we discuss and don't discuss on Zoom. But for the most part, they're making strides. And the other thing about Zoom too, I mean, Microsoft is as well, but Zoom's a publicly traded company, right? And they know the bottom line of security, particularly in this environment. So they're constantly vigilant about that. I also used another application in a networking group meeting, which was kind of cool. It's called Remo, R-E-M-O. And it was the ability to put people in rooms. So you actually separated from the group and you saw these individual rooms. You could see how many people were in there and you could just drop in. And then before you know it, you're in a Zoom environment. But for realism and for functionality, I think Zoom is probably the best.
And I think there's functionality within Zoom, because I was on a sort of a virtual conference where they can break you out into breakout groups, which I think is what you were talking about on that software. So Zoom does have that capability of doing that. I just don't know if you can drop in the way that you mentioned. Is there any other software outside of the virtual collaboration that business owners should invest in before year end or should consider budgeting for in 2021?
I wouldn't necessarily talk about software applications in particular, but what I would say, I just kind of want to reemphasize what Kathy said on the hardware side, and also talk about just from an application side. I'm a latest, greatest, fastest guy, right? I like that. I like to upgrade to the biggest and best. But now it's critical, right? In a lot of ways, to the point that Karen made before about, they won't forgive the audio. How many times have you been on a Zoom call with somebody where they're cutting in and out? And it's not their audio, it's their internet connection. So from a company perspective, and I agree 100% with a couple of the comments that were made here, I don't think we're going back to offices the way we did in the past. I know from my perspective as a consultant, there are certain things that I will now only do remotely, just because it's a productivity standpoint. So from the investment standpoint, we want to make sure that latest operating system, fastest internet connection we can afford the employees, the best equipment we can possibly afford for employees, because I think this is our future. And we want to make sure that they're connecting, they're productive, we can hear them, we can see them, and that they're functioning at a pretty high level from the comfort of their house.
Can I just chime in here?
Yeah, of course.
One thing that I do think most organizations need or have been moving to is some form of a secure cloud file sharing solution. And there's a lot of them out there. Many of our clients are using SharePoint because they have the security built in, but there's, ShareFile, there's Google Docs, things like that. You want to make sure that you've implemented Dropbox in a secure manner, but a way to easily share files securely, and in the cloud. And then the other piece to that is make sure you're backing that up. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. We like to see what we call a cloud-to-cloud backup of those solutions. And so from a software standpoint, I think that's something every business needs to share files. Every business needs to do that. That is just something every business needs. And then of course, email. The other comment I wanted to make around security, and I don't know that I necessarily have a perfect solution for it, but I had a client take a picture and send it to me from their phone, some sensitive information, and I just about flipped out, because I'm like, don't do this, and so just back to Drew's point about employee education and awareness, things like that, you want to make sure, they think they're helping you. They think they're being efficient and productive, but now they've got, this sensitive information on their cell phone, in the Apple iCloud, or in the Google, world, and so I think that's something that, you definitely want to make sure you keep your employees mindful of as they're sharing this information, and they're no longer, like you said, in the confines of the office where you have more control.
Kathy, I just broke out into hives because I can't tell you how many of the SKC team members get clients who text them things that are often sensitive.
Yeah.
Again, because we're not in the office, right? So it's easy. We don't have scanners, so it's easier to text a picture of something, and once it's on our phone, it's already there, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, so just something that I would discourage folks from doing. It's convenient, but not so sure.
Yeah, and that point you made, Kathy, about the backup cloud to cloud is critical, I think, because a lot of people are replicating files locally, and then you're sort of beholden to the local device. If your whole Dropbox replicates to your local drive, now the security of that local device becomes a critical issue. But what Kathy's alluding to is cloud to cloud in a secure manner, and transfer the security risk to the providers that can handle it better.
So we did have a write-in question with one of the registrations that I think is relevant to this category, and it's a question on what tool is available, whether it be Norton or LifeLock, that gives the most protection with the least amount of effort for a consumer. So I'm sure this is a broad base of possible answers here, but what comes to your mind right off the bat with that question?
So from my perspective, I think probably what that question's alluding to is that sort of identity theft issue, right? And how do we protect our identities, and how do we protect our financial institutions? So there's a couple of things, right? The first thing that you can do, depending on how liquid you need your credit to be, the strongest possible avenue is what they call a credit freeze, which means your credit's frozen until you unfreeze it. And so, but it might take a little bit of a ramp up time. So you would go to the 3 bureaus, you'd freeze your credit. When you go to buy a car, you want to make sure you had 2 to 3 days to unfreeze it, or you're not going to be able to buy that car because they're not going to be able to do a credit check on you. So that's probably the strongest method that you can do to protect yourself. Other things you can be proactive with is, and I hate this, if you're going to do it with a glass of wine in your hand, but you can Google yourself, right? Make sure that there's nothing out there about you. The second part of that too is everybody's heard of the dark web. There are password lists for sale, but similarly, and I think LifeLock offers it now, but there are services where you can find out if your credentials have been compromised and that they're available for sale on the dark web, which is why we often say no password reuse. But from a straight up, identity theft protection standpoint, credit freeze is probably the strongest.
This was not intended to be, we can do a free scan for anyone that's on the call for the dark web, if you're interested in that.
And I encourage that because it's a really good education point. That's great, Kathy, because when you see that list come back, and invariably when I was doing assessments, there was 3 to 4, 5, 6 people in every company that came back hot, that they had their credentials were compromised, whether it was a LinkedIn compromise, an Amazon compromise, they were using their work email in those environments, and their credentials had been compromised.
Kathy, will you be providing the wine for when we get those results?
I could probably do that too. Sure.
Sarah, we had a few questions come in.
Sure, go ahead.
Too, in the meantime. So one is about, could we make some suggestions about the best microphones, headsets, things like that, equipment. So I think we can do that in the follow-up. Once we have a chance to put that together, we can send out some info about that to the attendees. And also, is there a way to set up a client portal for clients to load sensitive files to a server that is cloud-based? And what do you think about that idea?
Kathy, take that one.
Okay, it's definitely doable. I will say with all things technology, it depends. It depends on what you have and what we might be able to build on that you've already got in place versus that you have to go out and now subscribe or acquire. But there are absolutely ways that you can set up secure portals for your clients to share with you documents, everything, some of the ones that I mentioned before, you can certainly use those. And so, but it's going to depend on what you have. We want to make it integrate with what you've already got going.
Yeah, that's a great point because I think it's part of a larger picture too, right? You want to take a look at what exactly are they sharing and how sensitive is it? And then what cost justifies what protection, because you can do certain things through Dropbox where links expire. You can do it very quickly, tear down a link very quickly. But again, even that's a little risky when the data is really sensitive. So there are some higher, lower cost solutions.
The other thing I would suggest is we've had some clients come to us and they've got like 10 of these solutions in place. You don't want to have 10 different flavors. You want to have 1 or 2. And so that's why I say it depends on what you've already got. If we can build on what you've already got, that's always the easiest, the cleanest, the most secure. But if we need to go out and implement something above and beyond that, you can do that. And so now maybe you got two solutions for sharing files. Maybe one's internal, one's external. But keep it simple. Keep it simple. It's much easier to keep it safe too. Okay, so
let's move into our final topic, which is new technology trends to watch out for and what they mean for us as business owners. So different than what Drew said of being an early adopter, I am not an early adopter. I'm not the latest and greatest. I'd much rather stick with what I know and not try to figure out a new device. I kind of get upset when my phone does an automatic upgrade and it changes things on me. But that doesn't mean that's the right answer. So we're going to throw up a quick survey, the last of this morning, on exactly what solution do you want technology to provide for you? So there's a couple of options to select from there. Do you want it to help you automate things? Do you want it to help you create work-life boundaries, which we'll get into in this section? Or do you want it to help you use data as a decision maker in predictive analysis? Just a couple more seconds, and then go ahead and share that, Brittany.
You can only pick one.
Right?
For purposes of this very informal survey, yes. Okay, so a lot of people are looking for automation, which is a great segue into our first topic under this section, which is for Kathy. So since we aren't in the office environment for the most part, it's been a challenge for companies to maybe do the same processes and procedures that they have been doing without being all under one roof. So are there tips that you can offer for automation of processes that can be done virtually, whether it's paperless procedures or any technology that we can specifically leverage to help us do that?
Right. So many businesses already have some of these technology tools in place. If they're on the Office 365 platform, for example, SharePoint has something called Flows, which you can use to automate things through the Microsoft environment. They will hook over to different third-party solutions. If you have a CRM, I would say look to that as well. I find that most clients or most companies, they use like 20% of what their current existing solution has in place. And if they just look at what they've already got, they could probably automate things that they're doing manually today just with software that they've already got in place. Things like Outlook, things like SharePoint, things like your CRM, whether it's Zoho or there's a lot of CRMs out there, but even in your accounting, just credit card processing and things of that nature. A lot of folks are still doing those things manually, and a lot of that is built in there, but they've never really had a need or a desire to look at it. But now that it's uncomfortable to do it manually from home, now they're like, well, how can we do this? We want to, even electronic signatures and approvals for, there's you mentioned e-signs earlier. There are a lot of really nice and secure electronic signature platforms out there that we've seen more and more clients adopting because of this COVID work from home environment that they never would have looked at or even considered, 8 months ago. So to me, I would first look at what your software can do for you that you already have got, and then identify what things inside of your organization you're looking to automate. And then at that point, you could go out and look for a solution if you don't already have it in-house. So.
Yeah, I know you use the term what's uncomfortable to do now, which I think captures it really well. And one of the things we've been finding is, check writing and issuing checks for your business. And, a lot of people do electronic bill pay personally, but we may still be printing paper checks in our work environment. And so what software, things like that have come to our attention on the accounting side, clients use to help them leverage the fact that they don't have to physically be in the office to print and sign checks and things like that. So we
expense checks, pain in the neck, I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to find a way.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So we did have a question come in through the chat about cyber liability insurance. So the question is that the individual's company has cyber liability insurance, but do the employees working from home open themselves up to liability by working from home with sensitive information? And should business owners let their insurance provider know that their employees, as well as the owners, are working from home?
Yes, in my opinion. The other thing too is those policies. You really have to scrutinize. You really have to, to just say you have it isn't enough without knowing really the details of it, what's covered and what's not, because you could have exclusions in there you're not aware of, and working at home could be one. So you want to make sure that that is covered. I had a situation years ago, and probably wouldn't hold up as much now, when I was in that world, when I was in the investigation side of things, where it was $1 million loss on a fraudulent wire transfer, had cyber insurance, but didn't cover a fax transmission. And that's the way the initial fraud happened. And as a result, they wouldn't pay out. So that little caveat in there about the fax exclusion killed that entire protection. So you just, I think cyber liability insurance is a good thing. Obviously not an insurance agent, but I think that you really have to dig into that policy and find the right policy.
I will also comment on that from a side. I also agree. I think every business should have, in today's age, cyber liability insurance. But don't just blindly answer the questions that they ask you when you're applying for it, because I have found a couple of our clients, they answered the question, oh yeah, we have that. They really didn't have that. And then of course, now the coverage wouldn't pay because they said they had it, but they didn't. So it's important to make sure as you're, applying, going through the process, evaluating the policy, that you're also paying attention to the fact of what you're committing yourself to,
So we touch on this almost every call that we have for SKC office hours, no matter what the topic is the work from home life balance challenge that we've seen in 2020. And so on the technology front, I have to ask both of you if you have any thoughts on what software or technology exists to help us keep some sort of a boundary between work and home life, even though there's not a physical boundary.
I don't know how relevant it is for this group because 10% wanted boundaries as part of their answer to that survey. And as we sit in each other's houses now, I don't know how many boundaries currently exist. From my perspective, Kathy, you might have more on this. I like to see the activity report on my phone, but that's more like, I could see how much, I'm on that device kind of thing and what I'm doing. But, other than that, I don't know. I think a lot of that's flown out the window in a lot of ways as we're in the comfort of our own home. But to your point earlier, you could do, virtual backgrounds if you want to keep some seclusion and that type of thing. But I think a boundary is more about that. How much time am I wasting doing things I shouldn't be doing? And that's where the device comes in.
I think for me that I have some technology things that I could suggest. One is the notifications. Don't be afraid to set the notifications to turn off at a certain time. Do not disturb is your friend. You can actually change that inside of Outlook. You can change it on your phones, all of those kinds of things. Teams, I would leverage that to help make those separations so that you're not getting interrupted while you're eating dinner, for example, things like that. The other one that I like is that I will often, I may be one of those people that's up at, I wake up early. So 4 a.m, I'm sending emails, but I don't necessarily expect somebody to respond to it. So, or maybe I'm sending it on a Saturday and I don't really want a response until Monday. I will use the delayed send feature so that it doesn't actually hit their inbox until the start of the normal working day. And that's built into all of the email platforms that are out there. There's a way to do a delay send, the major ones, So those are just 2 simple things. In terms of myself, I actually use a couple different apps on my phone to help focus. One that I like is called Focus at Will. It plays, different types of music and it helps focus. And there's another one called Brainwave. And they really help. If I need to get in and really zen and block out my kids and my, whatever else is going on around me, I will use those too from a technology standpoint. And, the one app I think is like $4. The Focus at Will is a subscription, but I find that both of those help me in 2 ways, because you can set them to run for I like to work in 30-minute sprints. And so it'll run for 30 minutes, then it stops. And so that's my sort of signal to get up and take a break and move around. And there's a lot of apps out there like that. Those are just 2 that I'm aware of. So, but I would absolutely check those out.
Nice. Thank you. Those are some new ones I haven't heard of before. So at SKC, we're passionate about using our clients' data to help them solve problems. And in the last several years, we've basically been swimming in technology to process our clients' data in a meaningful way that provides value. So Drew, I'm going to ask you, since you're in the consulting space as well, what are your thoughts on using data to assess risk and then make informed business decisions?
Yeah, this is the future without question. I mean, data analytics, especially now with our ability to be able to process that data quickly. And we talked about 5G a little while ago, AI, the ability of, machines to learn from data and make predictions based on that. From the security standpoint, yeah, it's definitely where we have been going and where we've been for a while and where we continue to go. Just looking at data, traversing a network or traversing a computer system in real time and making decisions about whether that's threatening data and how to react to it. That's the predictive analytics, if you will, on the security side. From a business perspective, I'm very much in the weeds on this because I think it is so critical. And obviously, a firm like yours, providing that financial aspect to it really can increase things within an organization. Everything from revenue streams, profitability, sales effort correlations. We post this, how many hits do we get? As a result of that, how many jobs did we close? Marketing efforts. You can even do employee productivity, though I'm not a fan of monitoring employee productivity in the sense of actual time. I always talk about output product, but let's not watch how long they've been on Facebook. Let's see if they're getting their job done. But inventory insights, AR costs, all that kind of stuff can, really have an impact by analyzing data in real time. I mean, if you go back to days gone by, right, your field for the most part was historical. We look at data in its history and try to draw conclusions and inferences from it. So if a project went over budget and you didn't profit from it, you can try to make some decisions for the next project. But wouldn't it be great to have that insight in the very midst of the project to be able to ebb and flow and say, hey, whoa, we're getting to a point now where this is going to be a GP, a gross profit of this. We need to make some adjustments so we don't lose our net profit at the end. And I think that's where everything's going. And you guys, accountants in general, have access to the most critical data in most businesses.
Well, we are at the top of the hour just about, and I will tell you that this hour flew for me on this office hours. So kudos to the panelists. Lots of information, lots of very relevant things to talk about. Any final words of wisdom from either Kathy or Drew?
My only words of wisdom would be security education, which is what Drew had, I really feel like with everybody being distributed and working from home, making sure you hammer home how important it is that security starts with your employees. And then the last thing is just keeping them connected, with this is here to stay, video, instant messaging, ways to get them connected and leveraging the technology to help them feel like they're together, even though they're not necessarily physically together. Those are two really big ones that we've been emphasizing, at least internally here at IT Radix.
Just finally, I would suggest, from the security standpoint, power in the pause. And what I mean by that is something comes in, you're looking at something, it's calling you to action, pause. Take a second and ask yourself, why are they asking me to do this? Is this legitimate? Would they ask me this? Would Sarah send me an email asking me for this password? That kind of thing. So power in the pause. From a human relations standpoint, take a deep breath. We are in this for a little bit, but I think we're all going to be okay.
Great, terrific. Well, if you do have any other questions that we weren't able to answer on this hour, please email Karen and Brittany, and we will make sure that in our thank you email that they get answered. We will be providing some microphone recommendations based on the question that did come in earlier. I want to thank Kathy and Drew so much for spending the hour with us. Very, very great information to share with everybody and super important in 2020 especially. This is our last office hours for 2020. So if you do have thoughts and suggestions on topics you want to hear next year, please email Karen as well. We'd love to add that into the schedule and rotation. And with that, I wish you all and your families a very safe and happy holiday season, and we'll see you in the new year. Thanks for joining this morning.